Well, good afternoon. Joined today by, of course, Chief Craig, the Deputy Mayor and former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Conrad Mallett, the Chair of our Board of Police Commissioners, Lisa Carter, and the Vice Chair, Annie Holt. I'm glad to be able to say that since the last time I spoke to you, we had 3 nights in a row where the Chief chose not to enforce the curfew. And the very frightening evenings that we had a week or so ago with elements who brought in rocks, railroad spikes, fireworks, using them to assault police, and we know full well they were people who had no stake in the city when it was over. We haven't seen those folks in 5 or 6 days. And so I think we're feeling confident now that what we have is protests going on by people from this community who care about this community. And so when the curfew expired this morning, I am not renewing it. I feel, at least right now, feel very good about where we are. My thanks to Chief Craig and the Detroit Police Department. Those of you who were out there Friday and Saturday night know what it was like when all of a sudden railroad spikes started showing up in boxes and flying at cops, fireworks coming in, and went on into the night. It was a very frightening couple of nights for the city of Detroit. When I look at 28 states that called in the National Guard, more than 1,000 businesses looted across the country. Hundreds of fires started in different cities. But here, the Detroit police were backed by the people of the city, and there's no doubt. It was the people of the city of Detroit who said, not in our town, not this year. Story after story of Detroiters intervening on would-be looters. We've come through it again by turning to each other. And so we're going to remain vigilant, but I think we have successfully convinced those individuals causing those kinds of problems to go to other cities because there wasn't any support for that kind of behavior here. The chief and I, along with some of our teams, will be meeting with a group of the protesters who have been very visible tomorrow, and we're going to sit and we're going to have a conversation, and they are people who are very committed to their beliefs, as you've seen from their actions, and of course we're very committed to the city of Detroit, and I'm hoping that we sit down tomorrow and have a really good conversation. And if the conversation is about how do we move systemic racism out of the criminal justice system, we're going to find a lot of common ground, because nobody wants to fight that more than Chief Craig and I do. We have a lot of ideas, and we hope that will be constructive. It just seems, though, for the people of the city, it's been, for the last 3 months, one crisis after another. And this city, again, in both crises, both in COVID and in the protests, has come out on the national stage drawing attention for our success and not for our problems. On the COVID-19 side, the fact that Detroiters embrace social distancing dropped the rates really faster than any city in the country. And we have had 6 deaths in the month of June. That's still 6 neighbors that we have lost, but it is a far cry from 40 and 50 a day that we were losing in April. And so today, restaurants are able to open again. Next Monday, hair and nail salons and barbershops will be able to open. Please, we're going to continue to urge you to follow the protocols. Our numbers are showing between 1% and 2% of Detroiters who are still being tested at the fairgrounds are positive, which means about 1 out of 50 of your neighbors has the disease. And so we still need to have our masks. We still need to have our distancing. But we've made enormous progress. And in addition to that, I've indicated that to the Detroit Parks Department to go ahead and start to put the basketball hoops back up and just ask the residents of the city keep the games down to small groups. But the people of this city have demonstrated that they're watching out for each other. And we're going to start to get people back to work and get things going the right direction. With that, turn it over to a man who experienced the COVID-19 crisis far more personally than he would have liked, and then went straight into the protests. He's done a great job through it all. Chief Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. And again, I'm excited today, and I feel like I want to take that victory lap. We had, again, a weekend of peaceful protests, and really, I just can't stress enough the professionalism of the men and women of the Detroit Police Department. When I look at this department, and having worked in other places, Detroit police officers truly exemplify what defines policing excellence. And so I'm deeply humbled and both proud I think I got a little interruption going here that want to wait. I can get that for you. That's a pet peeve of mine. I always, when I'm public speaking, it just takes me out.
But it was a nice tune.
Huh?
It was a nice tune.
It was a nice tune. I almost started singing. But again, I just can't stress enough how proud and humbled I've had a chance to talk to the men and women who were out in the front line several days ago. And I really tell you, they were just so proud and excited, even after working 8 days straight. These young men and women just really exemplify policing excellence. Something else happened over the last several days that I was equally proud with. I had a chance to talk to a man who I have tremendous respect for, and he's the author of the book Good to Great. Those in the Detroit Police Department know that for every promotional exam that we administered, Good to Great was a reference material, because this is our way of putting forth and moving as a Department of Excellence, and that person would be Jim Collins. We talked for about an hour and a half. He was excited to have the conversation. He wanted to know what things happened, not just when you talk about during the COVID crisis, because he watched with intensity, and certainly during the protests and what separated us from what he saw in other cities, but what has happened over the 7 years here in Detroit from policing. And I reminded him, a city that went through bankruptcy. When you talk about the whole issue that's been going across this country with defunding police, Detroit police officers who were here 7 years ago know exactly, under a different administration, I might add, and they lost 10% of their pay, forced 12-hour shifts, and really the morale was at the very bottom. And so during that conversation with our officers who were on the line, they were encouraged to know that this administration supports them, that the city supports them, and they know one thing, that our community supports them and wants the police here. In fact, so much so that many times when we go out to community meetings, and I know my colleagues from the Police Commission will attest, when you look at just the traffic fatalities that we experience here in this city, and the reckless driving, we can only do it if we're sufficiently staffed. I want to also, again, and I've done this every meeting, thank our local leaders like the Pastor Moles, Dr. Darius, and I want to give a special thank to iHeartRadio. Mr. Carvino, who is the CEO of this region, really called me several times and wanted to know what he and the stations could do to support peace and support the protesters getting their message out. So again, I appreciate iHeartRadio's commitment to the city. Again, Reverend Anthony, Ray Winings, Detroit 300, who really stood with us, stood with the protesters, the nonviolent protesters, really in allowing that message to be heard of peace. And as the mayor pointed out, what's most amazing, 2020 has been a very challenging year. coming out of the COVID crisis and how this department responded despite having 650 men and women quarantined at one point and no interruption of service. And then once that began to dramatically decline, going right into protests that at times became violent. And so again, that's the caliber of folks we have here working together in the city. I want to give you some stats that I think are important. So from Friday, May 29th through Sunday, June 7th, there was a total of 421 adults arrested. There were 3 juveniles detained. And of that number of 421, 136 were residents of the city of Detroit, which comes to about 32%. 275 called home in the Metro Detroit area, and so we're talking roughly 68% from outside the city. The one that certainly got our attention, 10 of the out-of-state residents arrested, and certainly we know definitively there were many more. They didn't have contact with the department, but the ones that we did have contact to who were arrested were from Washington, D.C. again, Ohio, 2 from Ohio, Tennessee, California, 3 from New York, and then Massachusetts. The last arrests were made last Tuesday, and there have been no arrests since that time. So again, I want to thank the protesters because they were committed to peace, they wanted peace, and our response was clear. We didn't enforce the curfew, and it was important not to, and because we really felt and believed in the messaging. The other thing I want to talk briefly, and it might come up in the Q&A, and I've said it during prior briefings, is we take any and all allegations of excessive force or any kind of force that a person from our community has a problem with. We take it seriously. We open investigations. In fact, the ones that we've talked about, we're still currently investigating. I applaud the work of our internal affairs, who are really moving quickly to bring closure to those cases. And that's really all I have. I know that we'll probably have some questions during Q&A. I'll turn it back over to the mayor for the next speaker.
So I want to echo what the chief said is that we do take every allegation of misconduct by an officer seriously. It gets investigated by internal affairs, and I can tell you from the briefings I've had, they are investigating them very seriously. But we also have an independent means. We have a board of police commissioners where you can take your complaint directly, and they will open their own investigation with their own investigators. And joining me here today to talk to you about how you initiate that process are the chair and the vice chair of the board of police commissioners, Lisa Carter and Annie Holt. Now, with that, I'll turn over to Chair Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Chief, for your comments as well.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
On behalf of the board, my name is Lisa Carter, and I am the chair of the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners. We continue to see strong and peaceful protests, and most importantly, concrete steps towards justice in the murder of George Floyd. The additional arrests and charges help ensure accountability of police officers and reminds those entrusted with the badge of their duty to help police each other. The true measures of justice are still ahead, convictions in this case, and reforms in law enforcement practices for every community. In Detroit, our community and our Board of Police Commissioners are committed to this hard and steady work of equality and justice. Our residents created this board with the protest and reform against police brutality and racism, and we have ensured civilian oversight for over 45 years. And I must mention former mayor, deceased mayor Coleman A. Young, who had the vision for this oversight board after the 1967 riots. The board is made up of everyday residents from all backgrounds. As you may know, the board has 7 elected board members and 4 appointed by the mayor. We serve as volunteers to be the eyes and ears and voice of the community. And we meet every Thursday, which is highly uncommon for civilian oversight boards, except Christmas and Thanksgiving holidays. So every week, there's an opportunity for anyone to come and share a concern with the board, the department, and the public, and to get important information about what's going on in the police department. The Board of Police Commissioners exists to be the public supervision and public accountability for the work of the Detroit Police Department. We regularly and routinely talk about police training, police misconduct, police conduct, and community-focused policing. We set our schedule at the start of the year, and just last Thursday, the public got a chance to hear regular reports about police misconduct and discipline. Our meeting videos are posted to view anytime. They are available on the cable channel, and you can review them at any time. I'd like to talk more about the board's duties for non-criminal complaints, which often relate to police violating police policies and procedures. When we have a concern about a police encounter, or when you have a concern, it's important to let us know. Public comments can help point to problems or troubling patterns. And we know about problems and concerns. We can work together when we know about them. We can work together to address them before they become systematic. The board has independent staff who investigate public comments to ensure transparency and a fair, open process. This is our Office of the Chief Investigator. The Office of the Chief Investigator is comprised of 1 Chief Investigator, 2 Supervising Investigators, 4 Senior Investigators, and 14 Investigators. Generally, once a complaint is received, it is investigated within 90 days and submitted to the board for the board's review and approval. In 2019, investigators handled 1,155 complaints. This was about 5% more than in 2018 when we had 1,091 complaints. To date, we have received 424 complaints. 10 of those are related to the recent protest. We received no complaints from this past weekend. The process to file a complaint is easy, and we provide information about filing complaints in English, Spanish, Arabic, and Bengali. Anyone can call us at any time at 313-596-2499. Again, that's 313-596-2499, or at 313-596-1830. That's 313-596-1830. We answer during office hours, and you can leave a message at any time during the night. You can go to the city's website as well to file a complaint. People have used the library computer if you don't have a computer at home, or a smartphone. The city's website is www.detroitmi.gov/BOPC, and then type the Board of Police Commissioners in the search box. You may also file a police complaint at any police precinct. They are required to take your complaint. Or you may file a complaint with a police supervisor regarding your concerns. We also still use fax machines, and that fax number is 313-596-2482. During this public crisis, we prefer you to call or fax or fill out the form online. When the health danger has passed, we will go back to regular operations, and people can go to the Office of the Chief Investigator, located at 900 Merrill Plaisance, or to any police precinct to file a complaint. You can also come to our weekly Board of Police Commissioners meetings when we're in public and file a complaint. We have investigators at every meeting. Right now, please continue to use physical distancing and stay healthy. We know new laws and tools are at all levels are vital, and ongoing improvements in policing and oversight, civilian oversight, Right now, our board is reviewing the Detroit Police Policy and Training on Use of Force and De-escalation. When you look at our weekly meetings, you see we require regular reports and audits from the police department. We share, and use a lot of information to ensure transparency, best practices, and accountability. Again, input from the public is required, so public reflect the community and community values. I'd also like to let you know that whenever we are in the process of reviewing a policy, we also post that on the public website, the Detroit BOPC website, so that the public can look at the policies and provide any input that they may have. Our board is always working to get it right, and we know Detroiters will speak up if they feel our board and the police department is falling short of their expectation or what they feel neighborhoods need. The board also recognizes the unique challenges associated with civilian oversight authority. Therefore, we still have work to do. Both components are valuable and vital. Police community and civilian oversight, because even when we disagree, we can still work together to achieve goals that move our community and our city forward in civilian oversight and community policing. Our board welcomes Governor Gretchen Whitmer's proposal to require officers act when they see excessive force used, and a new state Senate bill to improve police training. We look forward to working with state lawmakers and with people of all ages and backgrounds for these and other meaningful changes here and at the national level. Since last week, we have seen the power of peaceful protest in the city of Detroit and across the globe. Enacting, implementing, and enforcing new policies will need our energy and efforts for as long as it takes to see that the Floyd family is the last victim of such police brutality and racism. Our prayers and deepest sympathy continue to go to George Floyd's family and loved ones, and all that they have endured and will endure. They, and far too many families like them, are paying the endless cost for reforms and progress America should have made a long time ago and must have now. And I'd like to, at this time, just thank the chief and the mayor for their leadership during this time, providing the forum for citizens, residents, and citizens to protest peacefully. We are forever indebted to them because we are, to me, as we look at what's happening across the globe, we've set a standard here. And I believe that that actually comes from the relationships that have been built by the police department as well as the mayor of the city of Detroit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and civilian oversight has been a big part of the success that the Detroit Police Department has had in building its partnership. As George Floyd's final funeral proceedings go on, I think this country has changed. And while we saw race discrimination in its most brutal form in his murder, the racial inequity in this country is far broader. We saw it in COVID-19, when African Americans were dying at rates 2 to 3 times that of Caucasians. We see it in the unemployment rate, where the black unemployment rate is twice the white unemployment rate, the black poverty rate, twice the white poverty rate, and as the economy has turned down, it has hit the black community far more severely than the white community. And this was a conversation that I'm not sure would have gotten the full attention of much of white America 2 weeks ago, but I think there is now a growing awakening that there is a problem that we have to address. And so we are about to kick off at the City of Detroit an initiative I've been working on for the last year, and I think we have a good time. And we're going to call this the Community Health Corps. You've heard of the Peace Corps. I envision a Community Health Corps. Employees of the Detroit Health Department who reach out to individuals in need and find ways to address people with a whole range of issues. So as I've been listening to folks across Detroit in the last week, there's certainly deep concern over police mistreatment. But first thing I hear is, what's going to happen when 36th District Court reopens and I'm behind in my rent? Is my eviction case going to go forward, and is my family going to be without a home? For those whose water we restored as part of the COVID-19, they want to know, are you going to get me onto a plan that I can continue to afford so that I can keep my water on even after COVID? I'm hearing from people who have lost their jobs during this crisis saying, is the city going to be there to help me train for a different job? I've heard from people who say you've got $36,000 jobs starting out at Chrysler, but you need a GED. I don't have my high school degree. I'm making $9 an hour washing dishes. I can't afford to quit my $9 an hour job in order to get this. I'm going to be stuck here for good. Or do you have a program in which I can earn to learn? And in the last month or so, hearing from people who said, when I was sick, I always went to the emergency room, because in the city of Detroit, going to the emergency room is a tradition instead of having a doctor. It's not the way medical care ought best be provided. But now people are afraid because of COVID to go to the emergency room. Can you connect me to a doctor who's going to follow my care and take care of me? How do I get connected? And so I really envision a core of folks who work for the health department who can reach out to those of low income and say, we will be there to help you on all of these issues. And so I went to Justice Mallet and I said, this is the moment that I'm hoping that the philanthropic and corporate community will rally behind. And the corporate community in this town has been remarkable in recent months. When the kids in the Detroit public schools were out of school, $20 million in donations led by DTE and Quicken to buy 52,000 laptops so Detroit school children can learn the same way suburban children can. Those laptops will start coming in the next month. We have 8,000 young people who are going to have summer jobs this program. Grow Detroit's Young Talent. Some of them will be able to go to a work site. A lot of these young people are going to actually go to work on Zoom, the same way a lot of other Americans are, because of $10 million in donations from Detroit's corporate and philanthropic communities. And so over the next 30 days, we are going to reach back out. And so I've asked Justice Mallet to take that time and to pull together a team from across our departments to meet with the nonprofits, neighborhood groups, community groups who have been working this for a long time, and come back with a plan for a community health corps that will reach out to people who have been forgotten. And with that, I'll turn it over to Justice Mallet to outline his approach to this and what you can expect to hear from him and what you might want to do in the next 30 days.
So, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. This is an extraordinary opportunity, I think, for what a lot of us who have been doing this social work have been looking for a long period of time. Detroit has a great tradition of nonprofit excellence. What we also have is a tradition of doing it individually, one at a time, organization at a time. What if, under the mayor's framework, we were able to pool together all of the strength of the nonprofit community in a framework that is built upon the foundation of the city of Detroit, where we are able to coordinate the delivery of service to the people who need the services provided. Mrs. Jones, hypothetical person, we want to knock on her door. We want to knock on her door and say, Mrs. Jones, how are you? What are the barriers that you are experiencing that are preventing you from raising your quality of life? Is it the fact that you have a behavioral medicine eligible child who needs help? Is it that you need more job training? What are the goals that you have set for yourself that we can help you attain once we have figured out a way by managing your case all the way from A to Z to get your life stabilized? This is the fantastic opportunity that the city of Detroit is about to embark on. The coordination of this kind of work. If you think about it, in the water department, for instance, the mayor pointed out to me that under the leadership of Gary Brown, we've had people out in the streets, knocking on the doors, trying to make sure that people understood they could get their water turned back on, particularly during the COVID crisis. We have about 15 persons in the public health department now who are in the human services division who do case management on a very, very broad level, and in fact have demonstrated success, but because there are only 15 of them and they're only part-time, the impact has not been as broad as we might hope. In each of the city departments, in particular, if you take a look at the police department, our neighborhood police officers, the NPOs, a program that Chief Craig brought to the city of Detroit, it's a tremendous, valuable resource that if we could align all of the other opportunities for care, for support, for identification of persons who need assistance, in 30 days we'll come back to the mayor with a plan which we hope then will allow for there to be a tremendous impact in a sustained manner that will reshape the lives of the men and women in the city of Detroit who have not had the navigation skills necessary to change the circumstance that they're operating in. And that with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
And so we're going to talk about the first program, a $31 million housing security program. But before we do that, I understand the vice chair of the Board of Police Commissioners has something she would like to talk about, so I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Holt.
Thank you, Mayor Duggan. And to Chief Craig, please accept my apology for my phone not being turned off as it generally should be. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks to the Board of Police Commissioners and Mayor Duggan for this opportunity. When the notice got out that there was going to be a peaceful protest at this building, I just immediately cringed and started being reminded of some history that we shared here in Detroit, and I even had as I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. But to my surprise and pleasure to understand that there was somewhere around 1,400 people peacefully demonstrating on the lawn outside was really a feel-good for me. Now, what I'd like to do is share the fact that there are 3 actions that occurred from last Thursday and even most recently today. The first action is the George Floyd Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. Now, this act was passed by the House Democrats, but still we need to be vigilant and make sure that when this legislature is introduced, that it goes through the process of becoming a bill without us becoming too saddened by the lack of progress. So it will be our responsibility, I believe, to, again, pay attention to these various bills. The second bill is the Senate Bill 9045, which was passed in Lansing by the Senate at a vote, I think it was like 163 to 30. Now, and 18 Michigan senators introduced and supported this bill. And as we speak, I believe it's still in the hands of the House. So again, we have to be vigilant to make sure we pay attention to these bills. And most recently, I'm sure a number of us paid attention to CNN or MSNBC. And you know that the Senate also passed the Police and Reform Bill. And the one comment that was, the question was asked of Senator Schumer, do you really feel that this bill is going to get some real-time action? And apparently, the Democratic Congress has very good hopes of the Police and Reform Bill. Yesterday as well, Commissioner Bell shared an article with me that appeared in the New York Times magazine, and it quotes the words of the president of the Minneapolis a police union. So he asked me to share, and if you're interested in viewing those words, it's on the New York Times Magazine is online. So on that note, I'll just close. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And so we have now in front of City Council a proposal for $31 million. This is maybe the most positive thing, plus there were certainly other positive things that came out of the federal CARES bills, but it's $31 million for housing security for residents of the city of Detroit. And so I'm anticipating, based on the reaction so far, the council will adopt this relatively quickly. It provides even more outreach than what we have done to homeless individuals to identify those with COVID. We have been housing COVID-positive homeless in a secure environment with medical care. It'll allow us to expand that. For people who have tended to bounce from shelter to shelter, we will be creating 24-month long-term beds, a stable place for those who haven't had a place to go, to have some predictability and be able to get some help in dealing with issues that they can solve this once and for all. It will also give us money for lawyers to help fight improper evictions in court from people who are renters who can't afford their own lawyer. It will provide some money, in some cases, to help work out settlements for some of your back rent in order to keep you in the house. We'll have programs for landlords where we'll help pay part of the renovations for their house if they'll sign a long-term agreement to keep the rents affordable for their tenants. So we can keep that affordable housing stock in the city, and it will provide money for emergency home repair for seniors who otherwise can't afford it. And so the man responsible for these programs, this is quite a dramatic influx of money. I'm not saying $31 million is going to solve all the housing security issues in Detroit, but it's far more than we usually have. And let me turn it over to the man who's responsible for the programs, Donald Rencher.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that introduction and that invite to go over some of the HUD money that will be coming to the city of Detroit through CARES funding. Truly excited about this. As the mayor said, the city council will be taking a vote and hoping that they pass that. We also have to receive HUD approval for the funding to be used in this manner. I feel good about that. We also have to enter into various contracts for the entities that will be carrying out these actions and these programs. And so I'm hoping that our team, we can, through an expedited and fast pace, we can get these programs up and running in the beginning of July because the city of Detroit residents badly need them, especially during this time. The theme that the mayor eloquently went through regarding some of the programs that we have is just housing stability. In March, we set on a path to ensure that our homeless population is appropriately sheltered and housed as much as possible during the COVID-19 crisis, at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. And it was important, and you realize how much housing plays a critical role in addressing this disease, right? We need to be able to have people to be able to shelter, and we need to have them, and that sheltering helps reduce the impact that the COVID-19 actually has in our city. And so all of our programs that we are rolling off with this $31 million of funding are basically based in housing stability, rental assistance, legal counsel for people facing eviction, housing placement, homeless initiatives, and of course rehab, and also information for residents to be able to seek housing resources. And we're continuing to push that. As it mentioned before, it's great to hear that we're providing more human services directly to people by going door to door. Of course, HRD will continue to play a role in trying to ensure that these resources get to Detroit residents. But I can also tell you how proud I am of the dollars that are that we're receiving. Normally, we receive about approximately $6 million to do all the activity that the mayor mentioned, that now we have $31 million to do. And so I am acutely aware of the responsibility that we have and want to make sure that we diligently work with our partners to carry out these programs for Detroiters, because it's going to be badly needed. And of course, the mayor and HRD and all the departments here are going to continue to fight for our Detroiters to ensure that they are safe during this time, and continue to make sure we put out the resources that they need that are critical during this time. So just very, very excited about it, and can't wait to continue to push these initiatives through.
All right, with that, we'll take any questions.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jim Kirtzner with Channel 7. I did an interview earlier this afternoon with Mr. Tristan Taylor, who is meeting with you tomorrow morning. Have you seen the list of 23 items they want to discuss? And politicians like to say some of these are non-starters. What's your reaction to that list of 23?
You know, I think they deserve the respect to sit down and have a conversation before there's a reaction. There's some on there that I'm curious about. One is no police in the Detroit public schools. We haven't had Detroit police in the public schools in years, to my knowledge, so I'm not sure what that refers to. And then there's going to be a question on, do we end up joining together on things we both believe in, or do we have to agree on everything, or we don't do anything? But I look at one of the issues they've listed, and that's the cash bail system. I mean, this is something that I've found appalling my entire life, and it's, again, something white America doesn't really think about. But if you have two 18-year-olds who are both charged with breaking and entering, and the judge posts a bond of $10,000 for each, one has a dad who can write a $1,000 check and the rich kid is out. Other person doesn't have the money, they're sitting in jail even though they haven't been convicted of anything, and the trial is going to be 6 months away. So they're looking at sitting in jail for 6 months because they don't have $1,000. Now think about the pressure to plead guilty. Imagine if you haven't done it, and you are looking at 6 months in jail because you can't make cash bond. The pressure you are under to plead guilty to something you might not have done. This cash bond system is fundamentally racially discriminatory. Is this a time that we can get folks to focus on it? If you'd have told me 2 weeks ago we would go up to Lansing, because this is going to take Lansing legislation, not going to be an easy thing to do. We got Republican control of the House and the Senate. But if you'd have told me 2 weeks ago we were going to go up to Lansing and argue to get rid of the cash bail system, I would have said, you're wasting your time. Now I'm not so sure. It won't be easy, but I'm wondering if we can't get people of goodwill to rally together and take this moment of Mr. Floyd's death and make this system fundamentally fair. And so we're going to have conversations about, are there things we both believe in we can work together on, or are there not? And I'm not going to say yes or no on any individual thing. I'm going to sit down, and the chief and I and a few of our team will sit down and hear them out respectfully, and I'm hoping we find common ground.
Defund DPD, demilitarize DPD?
Yeah, you know, again, we're going to listen respectfully to what folks have to say, but the other thing is, I've heard from a lot of folks in this town, and this group is an important group. They've demonstrated their commitment night after night, but there's a whole lot of other groups in this city, block clubs and neighborhood associations and mentoring programs and business groups who also have a stake in the city, and they may have differing views on a number of these issues. This needs to be a conversation with the community. But my intention tomorrow is to recognize the extraordinary commitment these individuals made mile after mile, night after night. I think they deserve to be listened to thoughtfully before I react to the suggestions.
They said that they wanted a meeting with you to be with the group publicly. You declined to do it that way. You wanted to meet with them privately first. And he is saying, again, this is Mr. Taylor, saying, we're going to take that meeting tomorrow morning, but then any further discussions, we would like to have you come out and address the group as a whole, because it's the group that came up with the 23 talking points. And he further said that, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, we don't want to participate in ongoing, endless, useless discussions. We want to get some progress and get some concrete things done.
So we're going to handle this, I'm going to deal with this in good faith. And everything that I have ever gotten done in my life has been because people sat in a room together, even though they may have started out with differing ideas, but they cared about the end result. They weren't interested in embarrassing each other publicly or showing each other up publicly. That stuff doesn't get you anywhere. But if there is a sincere desire to make the criminal justice system better, and if you look at the items on the list, the great majority are not within the city's control. The great majority are going to take action from state or county or some other government. And so the question is, could we build enough trust to work together to try to make things safer or not? And I have not met this individual, and so I don't have any reaction other than to say, I'm going to sit, I'm going to listen respectfully, and whether we end up with common ground or whether we end up with folks keep protesting. But the one thing I will assure the people of Detroit is that we're not excluding the stakeholders who have stayed in the neighborhoods. We're not excluding the stakeholders who have been mentoring young people for years. This is not we negotiate the city's future with one group. They're an important group that deserves respect. But there are a lot of other stakeholders in Detroit, and we're going to make sure that everybody is included in the conversation.
Couple of questions for the chief. Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, good afternoon, how you doing?
When you talk about the use of force investigations, how many people within the department handle those kinds of cases? Is it internal affairs? Is it people from your office? Who are the personnel who handle those, and how many are there?
Yeah, I don't have the specific number, Jim, if you, we can get that to you after this briefing, but it's our professional standards section, which is broken down into three entities. First, internal affairs. If there's any allegations of criminal misconduct or just violation of policy, they would do that. Then there's the force section that investigates all allegations of excessive force as well as whether or not the force was proper. And then lastly, which is new and an add-on, as I reported out, Operation Clean Sweep, which is a task force that's been in existence now coming up on a year, addressing allegations of misconduct, criminal misconduct of alleged misconduct of former narcotics officers. So they would do that investigation, and that entity, Professional Standards, is a direct report to me. So if there's any criminality, once that's determined, it will go to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office for review and adjudication.
Has the pandemic affected Clean Sweep?
It has not, surprisingly. In fact, even during, while things scaled back some because, as you know, we had 650 officers quarantined, we had to make some slight adjustments, but they're still very active. Our federal partners are still very active on the ground with our investigators. So it's moving forward. It's just a very complex, it's not, and I knew it going into it. I mean, I predicted it'd probably be a year, but looking at where we are now, it's complex, and it's taken us in some other directions, and we are working very closely with both the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office.
Just a couple of questions to you from Mr. Taylor's comments. I asked him about how Chief Craig has worked to foster good community relations with the police department and the community. Do you agree that he's done that? And he said that you and your department tried to intimidate the protesters. He says, let's talk about Tuesday and then into Wednesday and the rest of the week. His exact words were, Chief Craig had to eat the curfew. Your response?
And there's no real response. It wasn't a matter of eating the as it was. We talked about in prior conversations in this briefing that I made a judgment based on the fact that the protest was peaceful, And so it wasn't a matter of eating it as much as it was really, that's what we always wanted. It was never our goal to arrest. It was never a goal for us to use any kind of force. Rather, we wanted a peaceful protest. And so over the last several days, there have been no arrests, and I consider that a win. That's a big win, in fact.
He says you didn't have a choice to enforce the curfew because the protesters didn't give you that choice. They weren't going to leave at 8 o'clock.
I'm not going to get into a back and forth. I don't think it's productive. Again, we feel, the department feels very strongly that it was a win. We're leaving here with a win. No arrests, no injuries following any arrests. So, I mean, it's a win. I mean, there were some injuries when we had to make arrests, minor, but the fact that we haven't made arrests over the last several days is a win for us. That's, again, was never our goal. We want and we embrace the message. And the Detroit police officers embrace the message. So it's a win for
And that's a
us.
really disappointing tone.
Yeah.
There are very few cities in America. On 11 days of protest, the city of Detroit only enforced a curfew 3 days. There are very few cities in America that had the curfew for that limited period of time. And, instead of talking about the success that we had for 5 nights in a row, you're attacking the chief for doing the right thing. It probably, I guess we'll see what happens tomorrow, but I was hoping there would be good faith in the conversations.
So what does that say about what the end game is here?
We're going to
with
find
the
out.
protests?
We're going to find out. I was hoping that we had shared values to change the system as opposed to attack each other, but I guess we'll find out. But I think what the chief did the last 5 days was the right thing to do. I cheered him every single night when he made the decision to let the protests go. And for a department that just a couple nights earlier was being attacked with fireworks and railroad spikes and rocks after dark, arresting somebody from Tennessee with a taser, just a few nights before, when the department was at risk after dark, for the chief night after night to say, this is a peaceful group, I'm going to support their right. He stood up and he said, I'm supporting their right to protest. It's peaceful. I think the chief did the right thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Just have a
How you
few
doing?
Good
questions.
afternoon.
This question is for Mayor and the Chief. What do you think about the concept of defunding police, meaning taking police money and using it for community outreach? That's from Channel 7, Heather Catello.
Yeah, I think we'll have that conversation with the community. Up until COVID hit, I continued to do a meeting every single week in a living room in a different neighborhood in this city, and I've had lots of conversations since. I don't think there's a community meeting I've been in, where the community did not ask for more police. That we finally got the 911 response time down to 12 minutes, a national standard. And what people in the city say is we want the police to come even faster. And the other thing that I hear almost every day is that Detroit has one of the highest rates of fatalities from hit and run. We got people speeding through these neighborhoods on these streets. Almost on a daily basis, I hear from Detroiters, why can't we have more police officers patrolling the streets, slowing this traffic down so that our children are protected? And so what I'm hearing from Detroiters is they want more prompt police response, more police presence. Of course, they want a police department that's from this community, that reflects this community and respects this community. I think that's what Chief Craig has been building, but I have not been in a single meeting where a community group has told me they want fewer police.
And I would echo the mayor's comments. That's the exact same thing I hear in every community member I talk to. In fact, a lot of encouragement and support for what we're doing, and they want more.
Okay. Next question is Violet from Deadline. Will the department reconsider its use of rubber bullets given incidents reported from the weekend or any others? Because people across the country have been blinded, disfigured, and badly bruised.
You know, less than lethal deployment, certainly we take the deployment of non-lethal or less lethal, what it's called here, very seriously. That's why it's so critically important that we remain patient, we remain professional at all times. We don't want to injure anyone. But as the mayor pointed out a bit ago, when you talk about police officers being attacked with items that certainly could be construed as dangerous, we're talking about metal, railroad ties, fireworks that were thrown in one instance inside or at a police vehicle. An arrest was made for felonious assault. That presents a real threat to the safety of our police officers, but also a real threat to our community and a real threat to those who want to peacefully protest. So it's important that we are patient. Again, repeat the directions, and when used properly, there is minimal injury. But anytime we have to use force, I've not seen throughout my career, force just doesn't look good. It doesn't, and it's a last resort, and it's always that force that's used to overcome the resistance. But when you're talking about a gathering, a crowd of people, and officers are being attacked from inside of the crowd, we have to stop the violence. But we try to do it in a very thoughtful and certainly strategic way, because we know sometimes when we make a decision to use force, there may be some injury.
And we'll always review the practices, but you think about 1967, 43 people were shot and killed, more than 100 more shot with serious injuries. And the point of going to the non-lethal approach was to have a way to clear a very dangerous, potentially riot situation without the loss of life. And so, I think we'll take a close look at everything, but the response is certainly preferable to what the response used to be, which was police officers having to make a choice of using much more dangerous ammunition.
And I just want to make the distinction versus peaceful protesters and those who become violent. Many times there's no way to make that distinction. We try our very best, because many times, and we've seen it not just here in Detroit but across this nation, those who are agitators, provocateurs are embedded within a group, and that's why it's so critically important to make sure those who are peaceful know that there's a deployment of less lethal imminent, and we give repeated warnings of that.
This next question is from Eli Newman at WDET. Concerning outside protesters, agitators, he's wondering if DPD is aware of any counterterrorism efforts by Homeland Security outside of the demonstrations widely covered by the media, like nighttime raids or similar operations.
I won't go into intelligence or conversations I've had with my federal partners, but do know there are investigative work that's being conducted, but I just won't go into any details of it.
Last question from Steve Nealing. Most officers were not wearing body cameras during the protest. Do you know that to be true at all?
We have found that there was some, I wouldn't say most, the majority did wear the cameras. What we learned when we deployed the number of officers out, that there were some officers that didn't have enough. So what we've done, Assistant Chief White has quickly made sure that we're ordering additional cameras, because when you're planning for a large-scale event, we just had no idea we were going to not have everyone equipped. But that's something we're working on, but the majority were wearing body-worn cameras.
The only issue was that we normally are spacing the cameras on officers working 3 8-hour shifts.
Right.
Have a large share of the force all on one shift. It created a demand that we had not simulated in our procurement, but we are now buying more body cams, so if it happens again, every single officer will be equipped.
Okay. That's all.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, sure. I didn't see you hiding back there.
Boy, that Kirchner guy has a lot of questions. I hate it when reporters do that. ML Elric, Detroit Free Press. Just if we could quickly, is there any update, Chief, on the young man who was killed on the first night of trouble? I think that was May 29th.
As of the day, as I indicated last week, we've put out images. We're still, requesting the public's help on that. And we just haven't had the kind of movement I would have liked. But we are still investigating that case.
Okay, and do you know enough now to say whether or not that incident was related to what was going on around where that murder happened? Or was it something that came downtown and had nothing to do with the protest?
There's no indication that it was protest-related. The only nexus is that the victim was leaving the protest. But the MO or the reason for the shooting, we found nothing to connect it
Okay.
to the protest.
I think Jim covered most of the questions about the meeting. Is that meeting, do we know where that will be tomorrow?
Well, I'm sure they'll share details.
Okay, but I mean, do you expect it to be at City Hall, or is there some
Again, we're
neutral
just-
site?
We're just going to sit down, and I'm trying to be respectful, and if they want to share those things, that's fine. We actually want to sit down and work something out professionally.
Okay, and last question from me. I understand the drive-through testing site was not open this weekend. Can you tell us?
Wasn't open on Saturday, it's open now. So we had more than enough slots Monday through Friday. In fact, I think we've probably shut down 4 or 5 tents because I think we're running about 600 a day. We had the capacity to do 1,200 a day. At the moment, literally every single person in the Tri-County area can be tested for free. We're running 1% and 2% infection rates, and the demand for tests is not what it was 3 weeks ago. So we are scaling. We're pulling healthcare workers out of Ascension and DMC and Henry Ford and Trinity to staff those sites, and we're trying to match the medical workers to the actual demand for the tests.
Okay, so that's just a matter of, you can meet the capacity with 5 days, and so that's what you're doing?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. We're
Okay.
not, nobody's being turned away. Everybody can get a test tomorrow.
Okay, and are you concerned that people are not taking advantage of this because there's a sense that, hey, we're okay?
You would hope when you make progress, fewer people are lined up. The volume of tests was driven by fear, and there was a point at which we were testing 1,200 a day. Now we're testing 500 or 600 a day, and who knows? I don't know whether these protests are going to cause a spike, or whether there's something about the warm summers that knocks the virus down. Everybody's still speculating. We'll know in 2 or 3 weeks, but we have the capacity either way.
Okay, and I just have one question for the chairwoman of the Board of Police Commissioners. Can you clarify if the review of use of force is a direct result of the protest, or if that was a scheduled review?
I cannot confirm that. It was a direct, as a result of the protest. I can't confirm that. I know that last week we talked about discipline. That was scheduled on our calendar. So I would have to look at the calendar to see I'm pretty sure that it's as a result.
Okay,
of
can
the
we follow
protest.
up with you on that then?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we just have a couple more questions. One is a follow-up from Violet at Deadline Detroit regarding disinvesting in DPD and wanting to know if the chief or the mayor would, yes or no, if you would consider some of the options such as more funding for social programs instead of police budgets. So
And I'll take,
Let me do this. So this is where we started. Okay, Justice Mallett is here. We just announced $31 million in housing security programs, and Justice Mallett is leading a community health corps initiative. We have an obligation to develop these programs, but if you ask the residents of the city of Detroit, do they want fewer police responding to their calls, I know the answer is overwhelmingly no. And so my responsibility as the mayor is to meet the needs of this community, not by cutting another essential service. So I don't see the two conversations as being linked, and I'm optimistic that Justice Mallett's going to come back in 30 days with more plans for funding that will not involve reducing police response.
okay. Question from John Hewitt at WWJ. Apparently some House Republicans today had a press conference where they were criticizing the governor's policy of having COVID recovered victims or patients going back to facilities where they had contracted it. And instead of going to a third-party location like a TCF center, they want to know if you have any thoughts on that.
You would have to talk to Denise Fair about that. You would never have sent nursing home patients to the TCF center. That would have been medical malpractice. You would have taken your most elderly and most vulnerable people and dropped them in a convention center without an established care team. So certainly, you could not have sent them to the TCF center. But what they did and the ins and outs, you'd have to ask Denise Fair.
Okay. And also from WWJ, last set of questions here, more broad. They want to know if the chief and the mayor have any additional thoughts on just this overall movement of the protests nationwide and what is it that everyday citizens can do to fight injustice and racism?
That's a lot, again, as I've stated, and I certainly don't want to speak for the mayor, we support the messaging. We know that, I think over the weekend as I began to reflect over these protests and just the overwhelming support from all races in America, I mean, even internationally, and I go back and look at some of the issues that have come up in years past, whether it's in the 60s, later during the 80s and 90s with the Rodney King riots, and a lot of things happened in response, but here we are still revisiting the same issues. One death at the hands of police is just one too many. And so we have to really look at what's working and what's not working. And again, I have lauded this department as a model, and I know that that doesn't mean that we're not going to make mistakes. There's a reason why every police department in America, all 1,700 of it, have a internal affairs unit and investigate reports of alleged misconduct. Do I think that we have made strides? Yes, we have. Does that mean we shouldn't do more? We should do more. And I'm excited about next steps that this department is taking, certainly to continue to enhance trust in our communities.
All right, thank you
All right,
very
thank
much.
you.